I'm writing a paper now about life in the time of COVID-19 in a hyper and super gentrified neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And I'm trying making an argument that I think is important, is in terms of trying to make life in that neighborhood, make it visible. And the reason for that, there are many reasons for it, but the pandemic, this global pandemic, as terrible as it is, provides actually an opportunity to look more closely at micro-social life everywhere in the world, but also in my own neighborhood. In other words, what has happened is people have been restricted to living in or near their home. And so their local environments become more important to them, and they pay much more attention to it. And so that's true also in my neighborhood, which has been actually sarcastically, I think, in some cases, but at least sardonically labeled as super, as well as hyper gentrified. You know, this is almost everything nowadays having to do with cities around the world. And I've actually edited 2 books on this subject. Is to talk about something about gentrification. You know, I actually think about gentrification as much too limited a term to explain what's going on. And gentrification also is like many other terms, value laden. In other words, it carries with it moral connotations in the sense among left-leaning social scientists, and most of us are left-leaning and to one degree or another. Gentrification has very negative connotations for the inhabitants of privilege. You know, gentrified neighborhoods are considered privileged, but at the same time, they're stigmatized places, because the gentrifiers, the people that they call gentrifiers, who are those with more money and more power and more education, etc., more prestige, who are moving into these neighborhoods, are seen as, you know, displacing, pushing out working class people, poor people, in some cases even middle class people. And so that in itself is a negative thing. But what happens is this connotation, this negative connotation, is applied to these people coming into these neighborhoods, as if some way or another that they, you know, that there's some kind of intention for them to do that. And of course, it's not true. It's a consequence of them moving in. In fact, it's kind of interesting is that a lot of the people who are called gentrifiers, particularly in the early stages, are people who are looking to live with more diverse populations, you know, and don't quite understand that as they move into the neighborhood and the neighborhood improves, it becomes more difficult for the people that they said they would like to live with, to live in that same neighborhood. And this kind of process goes on. I had written quite a bit about this as ecological. And so also what I'm saying is that the labels, you know, the super gentrified, hyper gentrified neighborhoods have little value in helping us to explain what is happening in those neighborhoods. So a whole neighborhood of maybe 100,000 people is defined, is labeled as gentrified. But that tells very little about what's actually going on in everyday local life. So what I'm going to be doing, writing about, I've actually already done most of the research, is kind of auto-ethnographic, meaning that I'm talking about in the first person. You know, it's an auto-ethnographic, and it's visual because I'm taking photographs of examples of the daily life on the one block. Well, it's called the face block. There's 2 sides of the street in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And so I'm going to be talking about that and showing photos between the beginning of the New York State lockdown for COVID, for the pandemic, which took place on March 20th, and 100 days later, when the first phase of that ended. And there's lots of very interesting things that I think have taken place during that period of time, which would be regarded, I think, as untypical or unstereotypical. They're just kind of ordinary things that take place, but also some pretty important things that have occurred on my block during that particular period of time. And a great deal of it, you should know, because people couldn't really go out too much and speak to each other, at least for the first month or so. People were kind of almost hiding inside their houses. They began to do a lot of social connections online, creating listservs. A block association had something. And so the ordinary things that people would be concerned about, the ordinary communications, weren't taking place anymore outside on the street. It would have been difficult in any case, even with the masking and being 6 feet away, at least from people. And so I collected that information also. And it's important for us to see the kinds of things that people were concerned about. Was how are we going to get food? And it was talking about, food delivery and how to clean things as they come in the house. And also concerns about older people living on the block and how they might be taken care of. Things that are kind of untypical for what you think about in terms of gentrified neighborhoods. Recently there have been talk about, people saying, well, do you need this or do you need that? In other words, I have something that might be useful to you. So these kind of ordinary things. Where can I order this? Where can I get help, etc. And so the kinds of conversations, the kinds of social interactions that take place in any neighborhood, whether it's gentrified or not, I would assume that these are the same kinds of communications that people would have if they were in a middle-class neighborhood or a working-class neighborhood or a poor neighborhood, where people have needs during COVID and are looking for information. And then it just happened, coincidentally, that since my block, or the place where I live, is very close to Prospect Park, it was a perfect space during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and marches. So our block actually became an assembly point for this. So what I was able to do was not only to participate in these protests and marches, but also to document some of it, these demonstrations, and also to walk around the neighborhood, particularly the block, and to look for the signs, of both the pandemic, even kind of interesting things of people hanging their face masks in the windows, to dry them after they were washed, and putting up signs to thank the essential workers. So these are a lot of the things that I wrote about and I could speak about.